So we're here with Rex Rammell, a Republican candidate for U.S. House of Representatives. Welcome, Rex.
Thank you.
I'm Brian Martin. I'm managing editor here at the Wyoming Tribune Eagle.
Bob Fecht, Cheyenne Animal Shelter.
Again, good to have you. Let's start, Rex, with what specific issues or concerns caused you to run for Congress this year?
I've been in politics for about 20 years, and in 2008, I ran for the United States Senate when I lived in Idaho, and then in 2010, I ran for governor while I was over there. And the signature issue back then it has not changed for me. As I've looked at the possible solutions to the United States problems, one glaring issue stands out above all the others if you're from the West, and that is the amount of public land that is controlled by the federal government. And that's what that map is that I brought over there. It's amazing to look at, to think that there's so much ground in the West that is controlled by the federal government, and it puts the Western states at an unfair advantage with the Eastern states. You can see they have 95% control of their land, and we have less than 50% control of our land. The state of Wyoming has 48% federal land, so it's one of the states with a little bit more than most. And Nevada has 86% federal land. So basically, the federal government is telling those states what they can and cannot do, and it does that in Wyoming too. We basically are like a big Indian reservation, in my opinion, controlled by the federal government, and people are making decisions for us that don't live in Wyoming. And that has been a problem for me for a long time, and especially when I was running for office before. So I actually was sitting there thinking one day, how when I was running for the United States Senate, I was contemplating solutions to the problem of America, which I could see was getting out of hand, and our debt was continuing to grow. But 10 years ago, well, it would have been 8 years ago, the debt was at pushing $9 trillion, and I was concerned about it then. Now it's pushing 20 trillion. So now I'm really concerned. And I thought, what would I do if I was a United States Senator? This is what I was thinking in 2008. What would I do if I got elected? How would I solve this gigantic problem? And so I started doing some research and thinking about, the only thing I really had to refer back to was the Constitution of the United States. I had been taught that it was an inspired document, that the founders were inspired when they wrote it. And I thought, if God's hand was in the creation of this country and he gave us an inspired document, that's probably where we ought to start. So as I started doing research on the Constitution, I realized that a lot of the things that the federal government was doing were not in the Constitution. They were in all areas of our life, and the Constitution simply didn't give them power to do it. And I thought, okay, that's a good start right there. They've claimed jurisdiction over issues that are not theirs, and if we could get those powers returned to the states, that'd be a good starting point. And the most glaring violation was that they owned so much land in the West. And the Constitution simply does not allow them, it does not give them authority to own land other than 10 miles square in Washington, D.C., what we know as Washington, D.C. today, military bases throughout the United States, and other needful buildings. It gives them jurisdiction over Indian reservations and other things. But as far as land goes, the land mass that they constitutionally could own and control was really limited to those areas. And so I started doing research to try to figure out how they got control of the land, and it turned into a book. Okay, this was my U.S. Senate research back in 2008, and it describes how the federal government got control of the land, how they've managed to keep it, and how, in my mind, the solution to our problems, to a large extent, is to get that land back. Then I had to get the courage to go around and talk about it, because Wyoming, like Idaho, became a state in 1890. So there's over 100 years of history. And I thought this would be a major and a very aggressive move by a candidate to start talking about something that should have happened 100 years ago, a century, you know. And so I decided, well, I couldn't figure out how else to do it. So I just decided to get on the campaign trail, and the people in northern Idaho loved it, which is where a lot of the public land's at up there. And as I continued to campaign on it, it became more and more popular. But I was not an established candidate. I'm a country veterinarian, was then, am now. I'd never been elected. I'd never run for office at that level, and I was a long shot. I took on the power of well-established politicians, and I did not win. That was a U.S. Senate race, and I was geared up and still in full campaign mode, and the governor's race was open, so I jumped in the governor's race, stayed with the same issues, did much better in the race. I actually ended up with 26% of the Republican primary, which was 42,000 plus votes. And there was a lot of people thought that and I took on a 35-year incumbent. He wasn't an incumbent governor. Well, he was the incumbent governor, but he had been in office. I think he was the lieutenant governor for like 20 years. And he was a U.S. congressman. Then he became the governor. Anyway, that's the guy I challenged for governor. And I did all right, but not enough to unseat him. And I became discouraged, and I was going after the power machine that they don't like it when you threaten them. When you threaten their power structure, they come at you with full vengeance. And I found it's not any different in Wyoming. There is a group of people that believe that it's their rite of passage to tell the other people how to live their lives. It happens at the United States level and the state level. Long story short, I was discouraged, tired of it, did what I could, left Idaho. Wyoming had always been my second home because I grew up on the Idaho-Wyoming line. I've spent a large part of my life in Wyoming. There's a mountain named after my family in western Wyoming. And so it was a natural thing for me to move into Wyoming. I felt like I was familiar with the state, and it opened up opportunities for me. And it was a cowboy state. I was raised a cowboy, so I always kind of wanted to be a Wyomingite. I moved to Wyoming in 2012, but did not want to get in politics. I left it behind me, and I buried my head in the sand. I didn't even want to pay attention to what was going on, because I had been through my experience. And I was just being a veterinarian, regrouping, going on with my life, bought some rodeo bulls, and started a rodeo bull company, and was hunting and fishing. And I was in Jackson, which was close to where I grew up. And I opened up the newspaper one day, and this was 2015. And it had a whole article on federal land transfer of public lands. The issue had not died with me in Idaho. In 2012, the American Lands Council was formed by a guy from Utah by the name of Ken Ivory, and he had picked up where I left off. And he organized this council that has now become a multi-Western state movement. And other states have joined, and they're starting to pass legislation. And when I saw that Wyoming was now involved and had legislation pending, my political heart started to beat again. I got resurrected when I read that thing. But honestly, I thought the only thing I felt at the time was some sense of accomplishment that maybe my efforts had not been buried. You know, I thought, well, maybe that's the role that I played. I got it going. Utah picked it up. Now it's in Wyoming, Nevada, Arizona. It's all over the West, Montana. I thought, go get them, guys. I started it. That's all I'm doing. And I walked away. Moved to Gillette shortly after that, and ran into the coal crisis and all kinds of problems in Gillette. And I thought, man, I just cannot run away from this. It's everywhere. The West is literally being attacked by the extreme environmental movement. They don't want us using our resources. I told my wife when I heard that Cynthia Lummis was retiring, I said, maybe we ought to get back in the fight. I said, I said, I come with a lot of knowledge now, not an ordinary country vet anymore. I've been in the belly of the dragon. I said, I know what the fight's about. And that's what got me back into it, is this issue. And I believe today, more strongly than I've ever believed, that it is the solution to the problem. Not just Wyoming's, but the entire West, because I believe it would be the greatest states' rights victory ever won, number one. And I think that it would embolden the states to stand up, and there would be other states' rights issues fall, like Obamacare, having the federal government tell us we had to have health care. Other states' rights issues like abortion, gay rights, gun control, federal education, all those sorts of things. Those would all fall if this one would fall. And so it's become the issue of my life. And if I am elected as a congressman, it won't be the only thing that I fight for, because there's a lot of other things that need changed. Immigration and taxes and wars, and there's a lot of things. But this issue above all others is what Rex Rammell is about. And I think that we win this one. Wyoming controls its land and controls its resources and its future. This would take the burden of the federal government telling us what we can and cannot do. This morning at the debate, I told them we've got to stop living in the federal courts. I said, we win one, they win 10. I said, and that's when we have a favorable profile of judges. I said, and I'm speaking as a Republican, if Hillary Clinton got elected, certainty that she would appoint liberal judges to the Supreme Court. And then what does the West have? No chance of winning. We basically lose every decision. But if we had the land transferred back to us, it would remove the jurisdiction from the EPA, the BLM, the Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife, Park Service, Department of Education, several areas. And so Wyoming's future would not be dictated by the federal court system. It would be dictated by, if there's a court involved, it'd be a state court. And these issues that come before the state of Wyoming would be solved by Wyoming people and Wyoming judges. And the people would be in control. So long story short, that's Rex Rammell, and that's why I'm in this campaign.
Mr. Rammell, you mentioned at the beginning of this, the two issues, the land issue and the huge federal deficit.
Yeah.
So I believe
federal debt and deficit.
I believe that a huge portion of the population understands the problem with the federal debt.
Yeah.
But they do not have an understanding of this problem. Why do you think that this has gone unnoticed for 100 years?
Well, it actually hasn't gone unnoticed. In the 1970s, there was a rebellion that appropriately named the Sagebrush Rebellion. I don't know that they ever took it to the level that it is right now, but it was a battle, and they wanted control over the ground. I don't know if they wanted title to the ground or if they just wanted control. But now we want title, and there's two lines of thoughts out there that there's some of the people in this race with me that say, well, I support management of the federal land by the state. And then there's my position, which is I kind of stand alone on it. There's a couple others that supported it, pushed, but they won't champion it. And that is, if you allow the federal government to tell you how to manage it, you haven't really accomplished much. Because if you don't manage it the way they want it,
Right.
it basically can become a puppet. It's like the EPA and the DEQ. The DEQ works for the feds. They answer to federal regulation. So they're basically marching to what the EPA says. They do the on-ground work. And so it's not really accomplishing anything. If the DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality, actually had authority over the state of Wyoming, like the fracking rule that was just shot down by a federal judge, those sort of things I don't think would be nearly as big of an issue. It probably wouldn't even have made it to court, to be right honest with you. Nobody would have had to rule because Wyoming would have taken care of it. We have our own. The DEQ has its own set of fracking rules. I think they're perfectly capable of managing those situations. So, did I answer your question?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Rex, before we have quite a few other issues to get to.
Yeah.
Before we move past this issue, what would be your response to those who say, well, if the state takes over all that land, it's going to cost the state a lot of money, and this is a time when the state is cash strapped, obviously.
Yeah,
the governor is
yeah.
announcing budget cuts. How would you
That's a
propose,
good question.
How would you
I
propose?
actually get that question. People need to realize that the mineral sector accounts for about 70% of the revenue in the state. There is a royalty tax called the federal mineral royalty tax. And it's basically split 50-50 between the feds and the state. Last year, the federal government retained $335 million closely of federal mineral royalties. And the state of Wyoming got a little bit less than that. We got about $329 million. So on day one, using last year as an example, we'd have $335 million in our bank account. And that goes a long ways to start managing the land. And the other thing that people need to understand is that there actually is a federal regulation, it may even be statute, that says if the federal government transfers land to the states and they sell it, 95% of that revenue goes back to the federal government. So there's no incentive to sell the ground. And my argument is, who in their right mind sells the golden goose? You know, if we got all this land back from the federal government and start selling it, we have sold off our future. So I don't think that's going to happen, to be right honest with you. And there's plenty of money. It's estimated that the natural resources in the West run into trillions of dollars, trillions and trillions. There's plenty of money out here. And can you imagine if we had access to that? We wouldn't even need the federal government. And that's the idea, to become independent of those guys, with the exception of the military and other things that they need to do, primarily military. We really don't want to be part of them telling us what to do. We're perfectly capable of taking care of our own people.
Rex, you've talked about your background some. What qualifications do you bring to the table that will help you serve as a member of Congress? Well,
because of where I grew up, I'm fully aware of the environmental movement. I've seen the timber industry destroyed, literally, when I was back in the 70s. I've seen the wolves dropped in on Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana. I've seen the elk herds be destroyed. I've got a bachelor's and a master's in animal science and a doctorate in veterinary medicine. And I actually raised elk. I had an elk ranch in Idaho. So I'm arguably, I'm an elk expert. I don't think too many would disagree with that. The grazing, of course, I work with large animals mostly. I have my own cattle ranch. I've worked with ranchers ever since I was a boy. So there's a lot of land issues, logging, grazing, water rights, wildlife issues, tourism. coal, gas, oil, all these issues, I'm comfortable with them, every one of them. And I think I'm the only candidate in the race, to be completely honest with you, that can say that. I literally am a land. I would represent the land, and that's what Wyoming is. Wyoming is a natural resource state. Without natural resources, Wyoming is nothing. We have no manufacturing base per se. We have some military component, but it pales in comparison to what the minerals bring in. This is a natural resource based state. Therefore, it seems logical that we need a representative that can represent all those sectors. And I don't know anybody else that can even make the claim that I make.
Thank you. What do you believe is the biggest challenge facing the nation today, and then beyond the biggest challenge, name one or two others?
Well, the federal overreach. I think they violated the Constitution. They've gotten into areas that they shouldn't have, and consequently, we have skyrocketing debt and deficits that we can't seem to control. So the direct answer is the overreach by the federal government, but the net result is the debt. The debt was going to kill this country. There is a point where we'll reach too much debt, and it's not too many, it can't be too many trillions more down the road, where there will be no confidence in the United States. Nobody's going to loan us money, and we will be in a state like Greece went through recently. Our currency will drop in value, and the economy will crash. That's the biggest problem facing this country. So there a couple other issues. Immigration's becoming a big issue, but that's because we allow people to come into the country and then we put them on our welfare systems. We take care of them, we educate them. We can't do that. We can be generous to other nations with our knowledge and skills and things like that, but we can't open our borders and then feed them and clothe them and educate them and let them just help themselves to our country. That is a big part of the debt, because they're getting on the welfare programs, and that's contributing to the debt, and so that's got to be stopped. A couple other issues: the corporate income tax it's the highest in the industrialized world, and it's forcing our companies out of the United States. That, along with heavy regulation, a good businessman wouldn't stay here. And so if we could lower the corporate income tax rate along with the individual income tax so that people aren't burdened so heavily, I think that companies would stay here, and then we need to reduce the regulatory burden and let these companies thrive. And then the United States economy will get clicking again. And I think that would solve a lot of our problems.
Rex, one of the biggest complaints from the public about our national political process is that everything's too partisan, and that's led to nothing substantial getting done in Washington.
Yeah.
How would you work across party lines to get bills passed that benefit your constituents?
I think it's gotten to the point where that's not much of a reality anymore. I think the country is so divided. In fact, that's the name of my book, A Nation Divided. We're not even close on most of the issues with the Democrats. In fact, in the forum this morning, there were Republicans and Democrats on the panel, and Ryan Green, who is running as a Democrat, he made this point. He said, we have got to have congressmen that are willing to reach across the aisle. And I rebutted him, and I said, Ryan, how can we reach across the aisle when your party is taking the position that they want the coal industry destroyed, and it accounts for at least 30% of the revenue in the state of Wyoming? I said, how can we reach across the aisle when your party's taking positions like that? Basically, what I think needs to be done is the Republicans need to control the House, the Senate, and the presidency. If we lose the presidency to the Democrats, we're going to get another 4 to 8 years of trying to stop their agenda. And this problem will continue. I do not see it being resolved by friendly politicians that meet in the middle. It's just the country is gone past that point. And that's a sad thing. And not a real optimistic viewpoint from a guy that wants to be a congressman. But it brings me back to my point that if the federal government were limited in its scope, and the states really had most of the control and made most of the decisions over their people, we don't have to get along back there. The one thing that probably brings us together are our enemies. And that's a proper role of the federal government. So in a time of war, you will see Republicans and Democrats join forces. Proper role for the federal government. But most of the other decisions could be done at the state level where we don't have to fight about it back in Congress. In fact, that is probably, now that I say it that way, that is the solution. Remove the fight from DC so there's no fighting over the issues. Take them back to the states. Let the states determine their own destiny. And that includes the social welfare programs, in my opinion. I think that's the answer to Social Security and welfare and food stamps and all that, is to move it back to the states. Let Wyoming take care of their own people. Because we're never going to reform entitlements. It doesn't seem like there's the will back there to do it. Yet they're going to go bankrupt here in a few years. What do we have to do? Wait till the programs are insolvent before we get serious about it? We move these programs back to the states. I guarantee the state of Wyoming has enough natural resources. We could take care of everybody. We'll have no problems. In fact, we'll probably have so much work there won't be any welfare people. Few, but not many.
Sir, the Republican Party has lost that presidential race the last two elections.
Yep.
And to do that, I mean, to me, that signifies there's a significant portion of the population nationwide that does not necessarily support giving up all those entitlements.
That's right.
I don't know how we overcome that.
We have to force the federal government to bring those entitlement programs back to the states. And see, that's where this land transfer comes in. If it could happen, which it can, it literally will be the biggest states' rights battle next to the Civil War. I mean, we're talking about literally a historic battle, not with guns, doesn't need to come to that. But if we can make the constitutional argument and prove it's possible the Supreme Court would rule in our favor. It's never been asked. Does the federal government really own all that land? If we could win that one, then we'll start winning other ones. The states' rights movement the 10th Amendment would move. And then we can stand up in Congress and we can say, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, welfare, these programs are all failing. The solution to the problem is let each of the states take back their portions and let them work it out. We just had a major states' rights battle over the land. Now let's take care of the social welfare programs. Some states may not want to do it, but I would certainly think Wyoming would be in a more safe position if we weren't reliant on the federal government. My concern is that one day, everybody that's getting checks from the federal government, those checks are going to stop coming. They're dependent on them. You go to the mailbox, it's not in there any longer. What do? You have no food. You have no way to pay your rent. You have no job. It's going to be a crisis. We have got to get ahead of this thing before that happens.
So in theory, and it's only in theory, I think, if everything did transfer back to the states.
Not everything, but most.
A lot
of it, yeah.
So let's just take Social Security as an example.
Mm-hmm.
So Social Security gets transferred from the federal government to each of the states.
Mm-hmm.
You would then have to have 50 different administrations for that system, one for each state. So, So in theory, you would be expanding the actual government role. It wouldn't be controlled by the federal government, it would be controlled by the state government.
Yeah.
So if you did that with several of these programs, you would be dramatically increasing the governmental payroll, maybe not the federal government payroll, but the government payroll.
That would be up to the states, how they handled it. I mean, if California wants to put everybody on the welfare rolls, then more power to them. You guys can balance your budget and do that. And you're welcome to let all the Hispanics in too. If you want to take care of them, go for it. You guys figure it out. That's not Wyoming's problem. Wyoming's problem is to take care of the people who live in Wyoming. And I think that we could run it much more efficiently.
Rex, how important is it for you to maintain your own voice and your own priorities if you were to be elected, rather than just voting the way party leaders would want you to vote? And then how would you resist that established DC system once you get?
Well, no, all I can tell you is that the people that watch this interview, I've got I'm very assertive and I'm very comfortable in my positions. A lot of candidates are, they can be influenced because they're not principled. A principled man or woman, it's hard to move them away from their positions, even with money and fame and fortune and bribes. And I think that is what makes me different. I'm old enough that I have there's very little chance anybody would have much effect on me, you know. If you last this long, you're not going to change. And I'm really a stubborn guy. I think George Bush said it right. He said it's okay to be stubborn as long as you're right. And I feel comfortable that I am right, and therefore it's okay to be stubborn on these things.
Rex, I want to touch on a variety of different issues and just have you weigh in on with your opinions. First one is military spending and how much we should be spending, and along with that, your thoughts about the importance of protecting F.E. Warren Air Force Base here in Cheyenne.
We also received that question this morning, and because of the world that we live in now, a weak military produces an unstable world. The United States assumed that role after the British conceded it. And if you'll remember, the British didn't concede it voluntarily. They got into financial trouble. They simply could not police the world, and they had to start pulling back and giving countries sovereignty and issues like that. The United States is in a similar position. If we extend ourselves out too far, and our debt continues to climb out of control, then there won't be an option there. We'll have to start pulling back, closing military bases. President Obama is his position is, I believe, he's more worried about social welfare issues than he is military operations throughout the world. And that really distinguishes a Democrat from a Republican. Without a strong military, the United States becomes weak and disrespected and vulnerable. And so as far as the military goes, I think peace through strength, we have got to get the respect of the world, and they literally have to fear us. Not that we're going to go in and take over their countries, but they've got to realize that we are so strong that we can stop any uprising at any time if we want to. And with Warren Air Force Base, it's a key role. It's one of the major military bases in the United States and the world. It may not be the largest, but it surely plays a key role. And I am in total support of Warren and expanding its mission, if that's what we need to do. When I get in there and start looking at the numbers, then I could make a more educated analysis of how we're doing. But I am very, very strong military.
Do you know enough about the numbers to know whether we're spending too much,
I
not
don't.
enough, or?
I don't. No, I haven't been privy to those numbers, and I'd like to see them though, and I'd like to analyze it and get a team. That's the other thing with me is that I want a team of Wyoming experts to be with me back there. I don't want to be having to make all this analysis and decisions by myself. So certainly on my staff would be somebody that I respected as a military person with budgets, and probably somebody that has actually dealt with war, and I would have them on staff making suggestions to me. I'm really strong agriculture, but I want a farmer out back there helping me too. Somebody in the coal industry, natural gas. I want to be surrounded by people that are experts in Wyoming, and I think that these decisions would be made it'd be a lot easier for me to make.
Can you talk about the issues of climate change, environmental threats, EPA overreach?
Yeah, climate change, I'm just not convinced that we're going to be able to do much as far as reducing the carbon footprint in the world. China's become such a major force in the world climate that I'm not willing to destroy our economy to see if it's going to change the way the climate runs. I'm all for reducing emissions and trying to do what we can, but I do not support the movement that is before us right now, making drastic economic decisions for the United States, thinking that it might change the climate. I'm unwilling to go there.
Tell us where you stand on Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, and how to provide health care coverage.
Obamacare is not a constitutional function of the federal government. Therefore, based on strictly that principle, it should be eliminated. Based on practicality, it also should be eliminated. It's not working. It's too big. It's too much government. The government tries to fix problems. A lot of times they create problems, and that's the case with Obamacare. So I would be in support of repealing it and not replacing it. That's where I differ from a lot of Republicans. They want to replace it with the Republican version, and I'm totally against that. I think that the free market is where insurance and healthcare ought to be taken care of. I just really believe that if you let the free market take care, and that's not just with Obamacare, it's in 95% of the other industries. Let the free market determine. When you get competition, things start to balance out. Prices get balanced out. If it's too expensive, people can't afford it, they won't buy it, which forces the prices to come down. I mean, it's simple economics. The economy, the size of the United States, is much too complicated for a few people to try to make decisions to manipulate it. And so we let this system just roll and say, okay, competition will decide how to price this thing and what service to provide.
How then would you provide healthcare coverage or just healthcare in general to low income folks who can't afford insurance?
Well, that would be, in my mind, that's where the states would come in. Okay, that moves back to the states. You're talking like Medicaid people. That would move back to the states and be up to the states how they took care of their poor. As a matter of principle, I believe that more jobs, strong economy, less poor people, less people on the welfare rolls, gives them dignity, and makes a better country. But there's still that group of people that are disabled or handicapped or for various reasons incapable. They need help. And I also believe in communities, churches, families. We can help those people. We won't let them go.
You've talked quite a bit about reducing the federal debt and deficit, so I think we'll move past that.
Mhm.
Education reform, changes from No Child Left Behind to ESSA. What are your thoughts about what's happened so far? What more needs to be done?
Same thing. The Constitution does not allow the authority for the federal government to dictate how children throughout the United States should be educated. In fact, it's a very dangerous doctrine. That's what Hitler did. And Mao over in China, they started dictating what the kids would learn, controlling what's in the textbooks. In fact, a case in point, I picked up my daughter's textbook when she was in high school. And of course, I turned to the government section because that was, what I was most interested in, what they were saying. And the chapter, someone had written it that claimed that the Constitution was a living document that changed with the times, which is totally against my belief system and everybody I associate with. The Constitution's principles are enduring. They were given to us by God through inspired men, and they don't change with the times. And so when I saw that in the textbook, I just about came unglued. I wanted to run over to the school board and said, do you know what's in this textbook? But that is an example of what happens when education is controlled outside of the local community. Now, if I'll pick on California. If California wants to teach their kids that the Constitution's a living document, I can't stop that. But in Wyoming, as long as I'm around and have a say-so, at least in the community I live in, it will be taught that the Constitution the principles are fixed. They don't need to change. We need to adhere to them. And so local control becomes the issue. And I oppose all forms and money that come from the federal government to try to influence decisions about education. And with that, I think the Department of Education should be abolished. And I would support that. And I'm not alone. There's a lot of people that believe like I do, and that would be something I would strive for. And then Common Core and No Child Left Behind and all those programs would be gone.
Endangered species and the ESA.
Well, that would go away if we had title to the land. There would no longer be a need for, at least at the federal level. Okay, if the state wanted to have a Endangered Species Act or an agency, that would be up to the individual states. And I don't like to see animals go extinct any more than anybody else. And we can't overhunt our populations and wildlife populations, but it'd be best governed by people locally that are right on the ground. They can make those decisions better.
One of the key issues for Cheyenne is funding for its airport. The enplanements are going down. A lot of people.
Funding for its what?
Airports.
Oh, the
Cheyenne's
private airports?
Well, yeah.
Or
Cheyenne
and
airport,
municipal.
private airport, yeah, municipal airport. For us, it's an issue of people preferring to drive to Denver. Costs are lower to catch a flight there. How essential is air service to Wyoming, and how would you guarantee that it continues?
Number one, it is essential to, maybe not Cheyenne, where we have Denver fairly close, but other parts of Wyoming, it becomes a problem when we don't have a lot of air travel. I'm not sure. I am sure. I don't think that the government should have a role other than to allow for the competition for private industry to come in. If there's a big enough need for it, then the people will pay for it. Otherwise, I don't think the government should be involved.
Rex, what are your feelings about the presumptive nominees for the parties, especially the Republican nominee?
Well, I supported Ted Cruz throughout the whole thing. He was a constitutionalist, very conservative. We knew how he acted in the United States Senate. He was a lot more predictable to me. Donald Trump, I like some of his ideas, a lot of his ideas actually. I think he brings valid points to the table, and I support him 100% now that he's the Republican nominee. And I'll do everything I can to help him. And then I will pray that he sticks to some of the stuff that he said, but he's got an unpredictability factor there that remains to be seen. And that's the danger with people like that. He's been on the liberal side of several issues, which worries me. But there's nothing I can do about it because the Republican Party only gets one nominee. So I support him 100%.
What do you believe are the priorities for Wyoming's lone member of the U.S. House, and how would you make sure your voice is heard among 435 people there?
The lone responsibility, well, it's not solely upon the congressman because there's 2 U.S. senators. There's 3 of us back there, would be. The team should be all Wyoming, okay? They should put Wyoming first. And interestingly, I have talked to Senator Enzi about my platform in general and the land transfer, and he's on board with me. He agrees that Wyoming should have control over its land, title to its land. Senator Brasso, I don't know where he sits. I haven't had time to catch up to him. But I'd like to think that the congressional delegation should be all in on Wyoming sovereignty and Wyoming independence as much as possible from the federal government. So that's
Define what roles you think the federal government should have, and then it seems like you're advocating kind of a system where every state having so much autonomy, you've almost created 50 little mini countries. So depending on what those states offer in terms of education curriculum, healthcare, those sort of things, people then would shop around and decide which state fits them
exactly
best, which could cause, seems to me it could create quite a shift in where the population is. So Wyoming could become much more populated if people liked the Wyoming values and the Wyoming offerings.
I think you're very right. Remember, before the Revolutionary War, there was 13 colonies, and they were individual and distinct. In fact, you couldn't go down to Virginia, or Massachusetts couldn't go down to Virginia and tell them anything. They were their own country. And when they decided to become the United States of America, they were very jealous about the things they would give away. And those powers that they gave to the federal government are written in the Constitution. So I'm not making them up. They're in there and they're listed. It's in Article 1, Section 8. You can read what the powers are. They decided that a common military would be in their best interest. That if attacked, they'd be better united than they would separately. Treaties and trade. They decided that they would relinquish that power to the federal government, and that the federal government would be more able to deal on behalf of all of the states than each state trying to have its own treaties and trade. They decided that the Indian reservations, they should retain their sovereignty, and instead of the state, it's kind of hard for a state to regulate a reservation within its boundaries if the 2 entities are supposed to be sovereign. So they gave that power to the federal government. Those are the sort of things that are in the Constitution, and I'm just following what the Constitution says.
Well, and I don't mean to imply that people don't move around the country already based on a lot of these
Well, let's
things.
go back to the
social-
California example, okay? San Francisco, famous place for gay people.
Sure.
Wyoming, not a good place for gay people, as a rule. Not that I have anything against gay people, but it's much more conservative here socially. So if you're a gay person, you probably want to go to California or another state that was more appropriate. Wyoming would attract a lot of the kind of people that are already here. People like to hunt and fish, people that are outdoorsy, people that are very conservative, family oriented, traditional in their values, where the more liberal people could move back to Vermont. That's the beauty of the United States. is that you pick a state that fits you. And if you don't like the way they're doing things, you move to a state that's better. That's the way it was designed. But we lost this somewhere along the line. The state boundaries became fairly unclear. And people see the United States as one big nation with a few local governments doing stuff. And that if abortion is good for one state, it's good for all states. And that's another prime example is people that are opposed to abortion. Let's say it was a state's issue. You could go to California and get an abortion, but you couldn't in Wyoming. And that creates this individuality of the states, gives them a uniqueness where people that think like that all live together, and people that think like this, they all live together, and they're friendly. I mean, you can drive from this state to that state, you can do business with them, but you don't have to live there. And like the marijuana issue, in Colorado, if that's what Colorado wants, you guys want to be stoned all the time? Fine. Just don't come to Wyoming stoned, okay? Because Wyoming doesn't like that. But we need that individuality between the states. We are a United States. We are not one big country. We're 50 individual states that are united in a common cause. And that is a big distinction and something that needs to be pounded on back in Congress. So just because you guys want that in your state doesn't mean we want it in our state. And I think that I would be a strong voice for that. Say, whatever you want, man. It's your state, go for it. But this is the way we want to do it in Wyoming. We want the power to decide. If we want wolves in the state of Wyoming, it better be Wyoming people making that decision, not people from the East Coast. You guys don't have the education. You don't have to live with them. You're not the ones making the decisions. We are. I guarantee you there wouldn't be any wolves in Wyoming if that were the case. But that's a really clear example. Most people in Wyoming do not support the wolf movement or the wolf reintroduction. And we shouldn't have to do what the people outside the state want us to do in that case. In case in point, they're killing the elk herds. There are hardly any elk left. They're annihilating them. And these guys are, nature. Well, there isn't going to be any wildlife anymore if you leave them in here. So anyway, does that answer that question?
No, absolutely, sure.
Okay.
The wolf issue is interesting because if Idaho decided they wanted wolves, Wyoming said they don't. When the wolf crosses over into Wyoming,
They'd be shot.
Then they'd be shot.
Yeah.
And that's in each individual state.
Yeah.
That's the rule.
Yeah, that's right.
Anything else that exhausts our questions? Anything else you'd like to say
Not
before
really.
we wrap up?
No, I don't. I believe I talked to you on the phone and told you that I was conservative. Always have been, always will be. Never had a big newspaper ever side with me on these things. This is the first newspaper I've actually sat down with in Wyoming. I hope that you guys are open to my ideas. They're solid ideas. I just demonstrated to you how I would debate on the floor of the House. I think I can make the case, all right? So I hope that when some of my competition comes in here and starts telling you that they're going to stand up for the Constitution and then they support all these federal programs, that you will remember that Rammell said, those powers are identified in there. And talk is cheap. If you're going to stand up for the Constitution, then by dang, you better stand up for the Constitution. And that is one of the big things that gripes me about Republicans. Oh yeah, I support the Constitution. I'll raise my arm to the square. I'll defend it to the death. They go back to DC. They don't even look at it. It ought to be, if it is what we say it is, then it ought to be followed strictly because it is the law of the land. There shouldn't be, I won't give you any names, but there's a couple candidates in this race that support federal education. And I'd like to say, and then they'll turn right around and say, I support the Constitution of the United States, defend it to the death. Say, well, could you please find in the Constitution where they have power to educate all the states? Well, it's not in there. Well, then you're a hypocrite. At least I'm true to what I say I am. And integrity is a big, big issue for a person that wants to serve the people at this level. If you can't have the integrity to at least follow what you say, then please don't endorse them. I mean, you're not doing any of us any favors. We have plenty of examples of people that are going back to DC that once they get elected, they're getting bought off. They're making decisions that are not in the best interest of the state. I would hope that integrity means something in a race like this. And you boil it all down. What is more important? What could be more important than that? And I don't know if you guys will endorse me. Like I said, I've never been endorsed by a major newspaper, but I should be, because I'm the real deal, and I should be endorsed. And I think I'm definitely could win this race. I'm very strong, especially in rural areas. You get outside of Cheyenne, I've got good support in Cheyenne, but you get out into the country where this message really resonates. I'm doing really well. I could be the next congressman. At least I'm going to finish the race believing that. We'll see how it all plays out. But please don't be like a bunch of liberal newspapers that just throw an endorsement to the most liberal candidate in the race. It's not fair to the people of Wyoming. And you guys represent more than Cheyenne. I know there's a lot of Democrats in Cheyenne, but there's a lot of conservative people in Wyoming. This really is a conservative state. And so that's my final plea to you is, if you're going to endorse somebody that would really represent Wyoming, you got to look at all of these issues, from wolves to coal to water to military to, anyway, I think you get what I'm trying to say. Yeah. And you, even if you don't endorse me, you put a little piece in the paper.
Yeah, we'll
Get
talk about
a little press
we'll
out
talk
of the
about
thing.
candidates.
Okay. So at least they know a little bit about where we stand.
Well, I think that's the primary purpose, is to let the people understand where everybody is.
Or are you going to do kind
The
of
videos
an
will
article, or?
The videos will be put up raw so people can watch the interviews. So.
And do you have a lot of people watch it?
Yeah, we have people take a look at that, and we publicize it citywide. So,
And so,
anything else as we wrap
as
up?
far as print, though, you not going to do
There will
anything?
be a separate article based on this interview, but there will be the video will be out there, and this interview will be used for our editorial recommendations. So.
All right.
Thank you very much, Rex.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank
your
you.
time.